When Dean Martin passed away on Christmas morning in 1995, his children expected to inherit the legacy of a beloved entertainer, perhaps some memorabilia, a modest nest egg, and countless memories of their father's legendary career. What they discovered instead would shake them to their very core. Hidden behind the laid-back persona of the King of Cool was a financial empire so vast and sophisticated that even his closest family members had no idea of its true scope. Little did the world know, the man who seemed to care so little about money had secretly amassed one of Hollywood's most shocking fortunes. Dean Martin had perfected the art of appearing effortlessly casual about everything, especially money. To the public, he was the epitome of cool nonchalance, the guy who showed up to recording sessions with a drink in hand, seemingly more interested in his next golf game than his next paycheck. His famous catchphrase, "I don't drink anymore, I don't drink any less either," became the soundtrack to a persona that suggested he lived purely in the moment, unburdened by the worries that plagued ordinary mortals. But behind those heavy-lidded eyes and that signature smirk lay one of entertainment history's most calculating financial minds. While Frank Sinatra grabbed headlines and Sammy Davis Jr. dazzled crowds, Dean Martin was quietly building an empire. He understood something his Rat Pack colleagues didn't. True power in Hollywood came not from fame alone, but from ownership, control, and the kind of strategic thinking that most entertainers left to their managers and agents. The genius of Dean's deception was its completeness. Even those closest to him, his wives, his children, his longtime collaborators, believed the act. They saw a man who would rather spend his afternoons on the golf course than in business meetings. Someone who famously said he'd rather be playing cards than performing on stage. What they didn't see were the late-night phone calls to his financial advisors, the carefully studied investment portfolios, and the methodical accumulation of assets that would eventually dwarf the fortunes of his more flamboyant peers. This carefully crafted image served Dean perfectly. While other stars battled publicists and tabloids over contract disputes and business ventures, Dean Martin moved through Hollywood's financial landscape like a ghost, untraceable and devastatingly effective. He had learned early in his career that in a town built on image, the greatest advantage came from controlling exactly what image people saw. And the image he chose to project, that of a man who couldn't be bothered with the complexities of wealth, would become the perfect cover for building one of the entertainment industry's most sophisticated financial operations. To understand the magnitude of Dean Martin's secret fortune, one must first understand the poverty that shaped his earliest memories. Born Dino Paul Crocetti in 1917, in the working-class neighborhoods of Steubenville, Ohio, Dean knew the bitter taste of empty pockets and empty refrigerators. His father, Gaetano, worked as a barber, struggling to support a family that often went to bed hungry. The local steel mills that employed most of the town's men offered backbreaking work for wages that barely covered rent, let alone dignity. Young Dino watched his father's hands scarred from years of manual labor before he learned to cut hair count and recount the family's meager earnings each night. The lesson was seared into the boy's consciousness. Money wasn't just about comfort or luxury. Money was about survival, about the difference between having a roof over your head and sleeping in the street. More importantly, money was about never having to experience that helplessness again. The streets of Steubenville taught Dean lessons no business school could provide. He learned to hustle, to read people's intentions in their eyes, to understand that in a world where everyone was fighting for scraps, the smartest fighters often won by appearing not to fight at all. He dropped out of high school to work first as a delivery boy, then as a gas station attendant, always observing, always calculating, always learning how money moved through the hands of those who had it and those who desperately needed it. But it was his brief stint as an amateur boxer that would prove most formative. Fighting under the name Kid Crochet, Dean quickly discovered that his real talent wasn't in throwing punches, but in understanding the business behind the fights. He watched promoters manipulate odds, saw how smart money always seemed to know which fighter would win before the first bell rang. He learned that the real winners in any game were rarely the ones performing. For the crowd, they were the ones controlling the game from behind the scenes. These early experiences created a paradox that would define Dean's entire approach to wealth. The poorer you appeared, the richer you could become. It was a lesson that would serve him well in Hollywood, where image was everything and reality was whatever you could convince people to believe. When Dean Martin arrived in Cleveland in the early 1940s, he was still Dino Crocetti, a young man with big dreams and empty pockets, but armed with hard-won street wisdom that most aspiring entertainers lacked. Cleveland's nightclub scene was rough, unforgiving, and ruled by men who understood that entertainment was first and foremost a business. For Dean, it became his MBA program in the economics of show business. Working the clubs along Euclid Avenue, Dean began to see patterns that escaped other performers. He noticed which venues consistently packed crowds and which struggled to fill tables. He watched how smart club owners managed their books, how they negotiated with acts, and most importantly, how they structured deals that guaranteed the house always won. While other singers worried about hitting the right notes, Dean was studying the numbers that made the music possible. It was during these Cleveland years that Dean met Sammy Watkins, a local bandleader who would become his first real mentor in the business side of entertainment. Watkins was a sharp operator who understood that successful entertainers needed to think like businessmen. Under Watkins' guidance, Dean learned to read contracts, to understand the difference between gross and net receipts, and to recognize when promoters were trying to shortchange performers. But the most valuable lesson came from watching Watkins negotiate. The bandleader had a gift for making deals that seemed to benefit everyone involved, while quietly ensuring that his interests were always protected. He taught Dean that the key to successful negotiation wasn't aggression or demands, it was making the other party believe they were getting exactly what they wanted. While you walked away with exactly what you needed, Dean absorbed these lessons like a sponge. He began keeping detailed records of his performances, not just what he earned, but what the venues earned, how many customers came through the doors, and what percentage of the night's profits his performance generated. This meticulous attention to the business fundamentals would become a hallmark of his approach to wealth building, setting him apart from performers who saw their earnings as gifts from promoters rather than their fair share of value they helped create. By the time Dean left Cleveland for New York City, he had transformed from a small-town dreamer into a savvy entertainment professional. More importantly, he had learned to hide his business acumen behind the persona of a casual performer. It was a strategy that would prove invaluable in the years to come. The partnership between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, which began in 1946, has been analyzed countless times for its comedic genius and its dramatic dissolution. But what entertainment historians have largely overlooked is how this partnership became Dean's graduate school in advanced entertainment economics. While the public saw two performers who seemed to have stumbled into success, the reality was a carefully structured business arrangement that would teach Dean lessons about revenue streams, profit sharing, and the power of controlling your own content. From the very beginning, Dean approached the partnership with the businessman's eye. While Jerry threw himself into the creative aspects of their act, Dean quietly insisted on understanding every aspect of their financial arrangements. He wanted to know not just what they were being paid, but how those payments were calculated, what expenses were being deducted, and most importantly, who owned what they created together. The duo's success was meteoric, but Dean was already thinking beyond their current earnings. He negotiated for ownership stakes in their television appearances, fought for residual payments on their radio shows, and most shrewdly, insisted on partial ownership of their film contracts. While other performers were content to accept their salaries and move on, Dean was building a portfolio of assets that would continue generating income long after the performances ended. The financial structure Dean created for Martin and Lewis became a template he would use throughout his career. He understood that true wealth in entertainment came not from the immediate payment for services, but from the ongoing revenue generated by content you owned or controlled. Every film, every recording, every television appearance became a potential annuity if you were smart enough to negotiate for ownership rather than just payment. But perhaps the most valuable lesson from the Lewis partnership was learning to separate personal relationships from business interests. As their personal friendship deteriorated, Dean made sure their business arrangements remained profitable for both parties. When they finally split in 1956, Dean walked away not just with his